Hello.
Hello,
Do you mind saying your name, please, for us?
my name is Bob Liddle.
And if you could take us back to the 1970s, what were you doing at the time? What was your family situation, for example?
I was married with 4 children within a 6-year time frame, so a big and active family. I worked in the pipeline business. I'm an engineer by profession.
And what did your wife do?
My wife was a teacher, or is a teacher.
And at that time, you were living in Calgary?
We were living in Calgary in Dalhousie district.
And I don't know if you could talk about what you know of the Vietnam War or the wars in the Southeast Asia at the time.
We're certainly aware of the war, and it was a long process. And certainly I was aware of the war, and it was a very bad situation. I know my impression was that it was inevitable that the Viet Cong would win, and that's how it turned out in due course.
And what were your first memories of the refugee situation that was unfolding in Southeast Asia?
I think my first memories were probably when it became an issue before the Canadian government, because they struggled with it in terms of exactly what policy they'd have for refugees. So I think I had that kind of recognition of what was going on.
So you were following the news, and the news was about what the government was going to do.
I'm a news junkie. I follow the news all the time. I get 2 papers a day,
and in the news, the government was struggling with how to respond. Was that the case?
Well, the governments, and it was really, I guess, almost a worldwide project, that I think the Vietnamese boat people sort of set the standard for how refugees in that kind of situation would be handled on an ongoing basis.
And at the time, how did you get involved with the sponsorship program?
Well, the United Church as an organization, it has its headquarters in Toronto, and it determined that it would be involved in this Vietnamese boat people project, and as one of the member churches, all of the United Churches were invited to participate, and our church decided to participate, and it came through the United Church as an organization. I wasn't the one that personally said, let's have refugees. The leadership, which was very strong, the minister's name at the time was Stan Errett, and he's retired now and living in Ontario, but he led this sort of momentum for it. But we were a very active and involved church, and it was immediately accepted as a good project.
What church was this?
St. David's United Church.
And what do you remember of that time? What do you remember of the discussions, or of what the minister was saying in order to, as you guys decided to get involved in this project?
Well, he was very supportive of it. It was a very active time at our church. At the exact same time as the refugees were coming, we had a major financial campaign underway to raise money to renovate the church. And we managed to do that, but we had no trouble raising money for the refugees. And in fact, we had money left over when the refugee project was over, and it was given to the family, I believe, and to do with whatever they wanted to do with it. But it actually was a relatively low-cost operation for us, because our church manse became available, because the minister, Dr. Eric, preferred to live in his own house and wasn't using the manse. And the manse was a 3-bedroom bungalow. I mean, it was perfect for the family, and we could provide it to them at no cost.
And how did you decide to get involved personally yourself?
I was automatically involved. I was the chairman of the board of St. David's at the time. So I didn't have to choose because as the head layperson in the church, once we agreed to do the project, I was automatically involved. But my wife and I were very conscious of overseas or whatever. We were CUSO volunteers way back in 1963. So we've always been interested in people from other countries and so on. So I automatically became involved as chairman of the board. I wasn't the head of the group of people that actually looked after the refugees. That was handled by what we call our Church and Society Committee. And there were many volunteers. And I couldn't tell you how many, other than that many. And one of the very touching things, and I still get a little choked up when I talk about it, that the Vietnamese family chose to name their children, not only with their Vietnamese name, but they gave them an English name, and they picked names from the people who were most prominent in helping them, which was a very thoughtful thing to do, but also a very powerful thing to do. And they explained to us that somewhere along the line, it was recommended to them, give your kids an English name, because it will make it easier for them in school and so on. So I think they did it for some practical reasons, but it was very significant for the rest of us who were named. My wife had a baby named after her. Well, there were 2 Carols involved, so anyway, one of the babies in the extended family was a Carol. There were no Bobs, so I obviously wasn't at the front of the line. but a number of the children were named after the most helpful people that were working with the family.
So, still in the preparation phase, before the family arrived, what did you envision your involvement would entail?
Well, I think we understood that we were to look after the family for a year. I'm pretty sure that was the contractual undertaking. Like, I've remained involved in refugee work, and to this day, that's the standard refugee contract, that you undertake to look after the refugees for a year. And we, as a congregation, like, there was so much publicity about the Vietnam War and the boat people, we knew that the people would have needs across the board. So I think we had a pretty good idea of the needs, and it was the quality of the family that made it very easy to help them. Like, they were wonderful people.
Could you tell me about the moment that you met? Oh, before that, could you tell me about the process of learning or selecting who your family was going to be, or learning about them?
I don't think we had well, the best answer is I can give you. I might as well be honest. I don't know. And I don't know whether the United Church head office simply assigned us a family, or whether we had some involvement in choosing a family. I honestly don't know. But if it's important, I could undertake to try and find out.
How did you find out about this family? When were you told?
Well, we started, I think we knew about 6 months in advance that the family was coming. And we started raising money because we knew we need money. And I think fairly early on the decision was made that we would just use the manse house, because the people that were renting it, we simply had it rented out, and they had wanted to move anyway. So it was serendipity. We had the house come available at the same time as we needed it.
So could you tell me about the moment that you met?
Well, the moment that we met, my first recollection of me personally meeting them, they were in the house already. We were gathering to, I think, figure out who would do what to try and help out. And one of the early things, as I recall, was somebody, wasn't me, volunteered to help take them shopping. You know, they needed to buy groceries and so on. And they came at the beginning of winter in November. And I remember very quickly Doe took on a job as a caretaker somewhere and would travel on the bus to get there because they had no vehicles. And that's my recollection. I'm old enough now that my memory is not so great, but basically I just remember it was a very busy situation because there were 8 in the family, which already, you know, filled up the house pretty good, and there were others there to meet, and it was an early meeting, I think, to sort out who was going to do what.
Can you tell us about the 8 members of the family? Can you tell us about this family?
Well, the central people were Kim and Doe, who both medically trained doctors.
How old were they?
They would have been close to my age, so they must have been late 30s or early 40s, I don't know exactly. And they came with 2 infant children, a 14-month-old and a 2-month-old children. 2 of Kim's younger sisters also came.
How old were they?
They were high school age. And 2 of Doe's nephews came, and they were, I think, young boys, 7 or 8 years old. So there was a family group of 8.
And just the 2 adults and 6 minors?
Just 6, that's right, 6 minors and 2 adults, Kim and Doe.
And so what were the kinds of help did they need in the first days or weeks?
Well, the kind of help initially was simply getting established in the house and getting their food supplies, winter clothing, as I recall. And as I recall, it was clothing in particular was probably simply collected from our congregation, because at that time our congregation had all kinds of young families. So I think the early needs coming in winter was to keep warm, have clothing, and then I'm pretty sure early on, I wasn't the one, somebody would help arrange, get the sisters. Fong in particular, I remember her more clearly because we had more involvement with her on an ongoing basis. She was of high school age, I think. She finished high school, and then she went to university, and as time went along, she got the gold medal award as the best student, and she was quite a remarkable student. And the other sister did fine too, but wasn't quite the superstar that Fong was.
Did you have to arrange for them to take English as a second language training at the beginning?
We arranged for that, and I think essentially it was in-house. There was a professor of linguistics at U of C that participated in their language training, like he was in the field professionally. And my wife helped. She had started into ESL way back in our QSO India days. And there were, I believe, some other people as well. So the ESL was provided from our congregation. I don't remember. My guess would be there wasn't the number of organized ESL programs that now exist across the board in churches and schools and so on.
So you came to the house and they came
People
to the house
would have come
and
to the house to teach them, yeah. That's how I recall it happening.
And you mentioned that Dole found a job pretty quickly.
I remember, and that's typical. Down through the years, we've had 8 different refugee projects, and it's almost automatic, no matter your professional or whatever, the first available jobs are either cleaning, and that's what he did. He was a janitor somewhere, and so that's what the employment was.
Did you help him find that first job?
Somebody must have, I think, made some connections for him. And those entry-level kind of jobs to this day are frequently filled by refugees, because they're the kind of job that people don't want to do any longer than they have to.
And then in the months that followed, what other assistance did you provide?
Well, the major thrust, and there were the lead doctor within St. David's was a fellow named Peter Price, Dr. Price, and he undertook to, and he is quite modest about his contribution. He was teaching in the Foothills Hospital at the time. I think that's what he was doing. So he had access to all kinds of other doctors. And the major effort quickly focused on getting Kim and Do accredited to be able to practice as doctors in Canada. So that was one of the major efforts that were undertaken.
Can you tell us a little bit about how that happened?
Well, it started through Peter Price, and there was concerted effort to try and move the system as quickly as possible, because there was an automatic need for Vietnamese-speaking doctors in Calgary, because there were a number of Vietnamese immigrants coming. And I can't tell you exactly the time frame, and I can't tell you to what extent Kim and Do got involved in providing medical service in an unofficial fashion, maybe, but things were moved, and it was one of the situations where, in my opinion, it happens in many areas. We had people in our congregation who knew the right people to talk to get things moving, and I think Peter Price said it took sort of 3 years to ultimately get everything done that they wanted done, because I think Kim undertook some additional coursework herself. But what I would suggest, to the extent that situation with that family, if you wanted it to be accurate, the best people to talk to are Kim and Do themselves, because I know they're very thorough. They'll have kept track of who did what and what exact dates and so on. But if you needed any better sort of background from what St. David's did, I'm pretty sure Dr. Price would be willing to, talk to whoever, provide information from his perspective.
But it involved a lot of help from Dr. Price and the connections that he...
Well, there was a lot of connection work, is what I would say. And I'm a professional engineer. Whether it's the Professional Engineers Association, the medical associations, they're very careful. It's part of their mandate that nobody gets a license to practice engineering or medicine until they've done the necessary qualification. But if you've got somebody advocating for you that knows the system, things move more quickly. And we had that benefit. Peter Price was the main doctor, but there were at least one other doctor in the congregation that was involved, maybe 2. But but in our congregation we had a number of professional people in different occupations.
And so Doe became a doctor first, and then his wife.
And Kim followed, yeah. And Doe practiced as a family physician, and Kim became an obstetrician, baby doctor. And I know Dr. Price remarks on having observed her work that she was quite very, very good obstetrician.
And so if that took about 3 years for the professional the family to achieve the professions that they wanted, how much involvement did the congregation, how involved did the congregation remain after the 1 year commitment?
Well, it became a matter of the connections that were made by the volunteers. And for instance, there was an older couple, like older than I was at the time, and I couldn't tell you their exact age, but their names were Walter and Maxine Tate. And as an example of the involvement that when Walter was the first one to pass away of that family, Doe was one of the doctors. He simply undertook to be involved with Walter's family doctor to do whatever he could, stay in touch. And the same with Maxine, that his wife, who lived longer, but she got into an assisted living home, and Kim and Doe would be frequent visitors, and so there was a definite family connection. And in our situation, my wife and I, and particularly through my wife's efforts, we became quite good friends with Fong, who was the very clever sister that advanced through U of C, ended up going down to, I forget which California university. She was in the computer field, IT person. And we kept in touch with her over the years. She got married, they came by with her children, and so on and so on. And I think there were other instances of other people that had similar ongoing connections with the family. And for us at least, they exist to this day.
And just before we move on, can you tell us a bit about Fong's schooling? How long did it take after they arrived for her to get to university?
I couldn't tell you the exact year, but as I recall, I think she went into high school at grade 12 level, but I'm not 100% sure of that. But she excelled in school. And then when she went to U of C, she did get an award as the top student in her field. And she went on to get an advanced degree, I don't know from which California university. And she married and has her own children, and so on and so on.
So that was your first refugee sponsorship experience.
Yes.
Could you tell us about some of the things that you learned from that time, from that first project that you applied, and how you applied those lessons later on?
Well, I think what we learned is that it was important to make sure you had the financial support available. So over the years, we have never had any problem making sure we had financial support in the refugees that we did. The other important thing was the involvement of people to help with, well, grocery shopping is certainly one of the very earliest things that maybe people wouldn't automatically think of. But if you come and you are established in a home, one of the first things you need to do is eat when you got to have some. So, and the most recent example I can give you is we became involved in the Tibetan refugee project. This, you're probably aware of it, but a special arrangement that was made with the Dalai Lama to have 1,000 Tibetan refugees from India come to Canada. And our role there, because it was managed mainly by the Tibetan diaspora that exists in Calgary and across the country, was we had a group of people, 4 or 5 volunteers, that took the new refugees as they came, going shopping. And there was something like 300 of Tibetans arrived in Calgary, because the head of the Tibetan refugee project was a fellow called Nima Dorji, who happened to be from Calgary. He was responsible for it on that. So I would say that on all of the subsequent refugee projects, and I haven't been involved in them all, that 2 key things. One, you've got to be financially ready, because you do enter an actual contract that says you're liable, so you got to be prepared to raise the money. And you need a significant number of people prepared to do the hands-on help with things like grocery shopping, getting the kids registered in school, getting connections to medical help. All of the families I'm like Kim and Do that had their own doctors, and just yeah. So it's the creature kind of things that every person needs. You got to be ready to help them with it, and you got to make sure that there's enough people in your, from our point of view as the church, enough people in the congregation ready to put their shoulder to the wheel, and then it'll work.
Have things changed over the years in terms of what the challenges are for the sponsors as well as for the refugees?
I would say they haven't materially changed. That it was to some extent easier probably if you were in Calgary, because there were Calgary and Alberta in general has been a province that's had a good, strong economy for many years. So there were employment opportunities. Now, this last project we were involved, and we didn't have much to do with looking for employment, but during the last 5 years, when the Tibetan project covered about 4 years, getting jobs became more difficult because Calgary's economy turned down. But in an overall sense, it hasn't changed that much. There's always in the background some, we'll call it noise, from people who aren't all that keen for Canada to have more immigrants. But generally, one of the most positive things I would say for Canada is that we do have one of the, I think, best refugee systems of countries anywhere in the world. And I hope we maintain it.
And still on this theme of comparing, your experiences in the late 70s and now, I guess the settlement services have been more established, have grown more established.
Oh yes. Well, I was a director of the Calgary Catholic Immigration Society, and I'm from the United Church, but that society was actually founded at the time of the Vietnamese boat people, and it's a very prominent one in Calgary, and that's for sure true, that there is a much more established infrastructure of organizations that are permanent organizations to manage refugees than there was back at the time of the boat people. I think from my perspective, the boat people experience basically laid the groundwork for most of the policy that continues to this day in Canada.
Do you have examples of that?
Well, for instance, I just went on the website to better acquaint myself for this interview in part. And the Mennonite church in Manitoba was the one that really led the way for the involvement of churches in refugee settlement. And I know back then they established this standard that 5 people could organize themselves as a sponsoring group. And that group of 5 option remains open to this day. So that's one obvious example.
So with the settlement services being established over the years, has that helped helped make things easier for the sponsors, the group of sponsors?
Yes, I think that it has definitely made it easier because there is an established protocol to follow. So I think it has made it easier for sponsoring groups to do a refugee project.
And how have things changed in terms of helping refugees who come here with professional credentials back home enter their original professions? Has that become easier with the years?
It's become easier, and I don't in any way want to suggest that it is a whole lot easier, but it has become easier because the reality is that over the last 50 years, Canada as a country has significantly changed, and we have a very diverse population, and that the professional organizations have slowly, with a lot of urging from the outside, improved their processes. Part of it's just simply paperwork to make it more user-friendly, and at the same time maintaining their mandate to make sure that anybody that eventually practices as a professional in Canada is properly qualified. So it's improved. And I wouldn't say whether it's half as easy or it's somewhat easier, and it automatically becomes easier because when you look at the memberships now of professional organizations as compared to what it was 40 years ago, there's all kinds of more born in Canada professionals who are Vietnamese or Iraqi or Irani, so automatically the professions internally end up with Canadian trained professionals who obviously are in a position to influence policy for people coming from their whatever countries of origin they came from.
And because you have the benefit of, or because your church has been involved with 8 sponsorship projects, have you benefited from a certain template? Like, have you developed for yourselves a sense of, like, this is how things will unfold?
I would say yes, but the template is actually pretty simple. Like, there is the defined programs that are available through the government, and what you have to do to qualify, and what you have to enter into a contract, and so on and so on. But the one fundamental, there's a couple of fundamentals that I would say will never change. If you're a sponsoring organization, you've got to be really sure you've got financial support, and that doesn't mean somebody writes a check at the beginning and says, here, do it. It takes work. And the other one that doesn't change is, and it's the other part of the financial, that the hands-on support from enough members of your sponsoring organization to do the kind of simple but necessary work of helping with getting English training, helping to learn how to shop, being able to find a dentist, a doctor, the services everybody needs. So, yeah, there's a template, but the template is the fundamentals of the template don't change.
And has it become more difficult or easier over the years to raise the money for this for the refugee sponsorship?
I would say that in my own experience, it has stayed much the same, and I've been involved in other organizations for fundraising. At the end of the day, there's no substitute. You've got to have some people willing to raise funds that are willing to talk directly to people and make it happen.
Is there anything else you would like to add?
I'll just add that I think that the project you're undertaking is very timely, that we are entering a period in time in Canada where there may be more pushback to immigration than there's been historically. I hope not, but I think what you're trying to do in terms of gather information from people with experience and put together the results of this study, and I assume you'll make the results widely available, it's a good thing that you're doing.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you
You're
for
welcome.
participating in our project and sharing your experiences.
Thank you.
I do have one more follow-up question for you. Over the years, how has public opinion changed, or has public opinion changed, and how, about Canada's refugee program?
I think over the years, the public support of our immigration policy has largely been maintained, and I think to some extent it's a little better, but it's certainly not worse. But I'm not going to say that it's much better, but it's moving in that direction, I think.
And you mentioned a little while ago that this project is timely because you're sensing a shift in public mood?
Yes, I think it is timely because there is the potential that certainly in Alberta it's already happening, where we're getting used to a more difficult environment economically, and there's the risk that Canada in total may go that way. So it's timely to do a project like yours, where out of it I know are going to come a number of highlights where the sponsorships have gone well, the immigrants have gone on to make real contributions to Canada and so on. So that's why I think it's timely, but there is a risk of changing, and immigrants themselves are part of that change. Like my wife, who taught ESL for many years, and would talk about the experience that she saw, where immigrants themselves, having struggled to get established, start raising the question, well, maybe there's enough of us now. Maybe we shouldn't keep inviting more people in, from the fully understandable perspective that they had trouble competing to get their job, and then if more immigrants come, more competition. That doesn't mean it's widespread, but it's interesting to see how once immigrants become established in Canada, they start to adopt some of the same concerns that are there for some Canadians.
Well, thank you for letting us in, but let's close the door.
Yeah, let's just not keep the door quite so wide open. So yeah, that's a factor, and I don't want to say it's major, but it is. What it does show is that actually we do a good job of integrating immigrants to the country, because after a while they start having some of the same biases that Canadians have.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
So you've got a long list of names in your hands there. Could you please tell me about them?
Well, it's a list that was prepared, looks like 6 or 7 years after our initial refugee family came. And I'm not sure who prepared this list, but it's quite comprehensive, and what it does show is that from our original, I guess I could call it the nuclear family of 2 adults and 8 younger people. They went on, and I don't know all the details of it, but they were very successful in arranging for the immigration to Canada of more of their extended family. And by and large, all of that extended family, while they're not all doctors, but they are all people who've managed to fit in pretty well and make contributions to Canadian society, and then obviously expand the family group that Doctors Doe and Kim got started.
So the people that you sponsored and supported in turn sponsored or supported others?
Yes, they, well, for sure supported, and if I knew, I'd tell you. I don't know to what extent they were on the contract line sponsors or whether others did that, but they certainly made it happen, helped make it happen, and happen successfully, because as this list shows, there's various occupations that the people entered into and had success.
Can we have a view of that? That's a pretty long list.
Yes, it's a long list, and written by someone who still has superb cursive writing, which isn't getting taught anymore in schools.
So they're pretty remarkable people.
Yes, they were and are remarkable people.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.